Our topic for this session is man and virtues. Man and virtues. Okay, so one of the important element of our nature as human beings, as human persons, is our permanent tendencies and dispositions that somehow tell us who we are as persons. These tendencies or dispositions are called virtues. Virtues are actually permanent good habits. Okay, so our permanent dispositions or tendencies are called habits, and habits are divided into two kinds: the good habits and the bad habits. The good habits are called virtues, and the bad habits are called vices. Okay, so virtues are essential in our proper conduct, both as an individual and as a member of a community or member of the society. Okay, so of course, when you say you are a person of virtue or a virtuous person, that means you are a good man, you're a good person. So good persons are virtuous persons. They are persons of good character, and they are good members of the society. So a virtuous person is not just a person who is good in himself, is also a person who contributes to the society. He is also a good member of the society. So we can see here that virtue would be some kind of the the highest, the virtuous person would be the highest ideal or the ideal of the human person. Okay, so that some philosophers would call the virtuous person as the sage. So it's not just being a person, being a human person. We must be good human persons. We must be virtuous persons, or in the words of the ancient masters, sage. We must be a sage. Okay, of course, what is the meaning of sage will depend on the philosopher or philosophies that we are going to discuss. Okay, so we're going to follow three philosophers in this topic, and they are Aristotle, Confucius, and Lao Tzu. So Aristotle discusses the notion of virtue as excellence. Okay, so we're going to discuss what he meant by excellence. And in Confucius and Lao Tzu offers us lesson about how the human person can function in the society by following the laws of nature and society and by cultivating the human virtues. So Aristotle tells us that we need to be virtuous persons. Okay? And he defines what I mean by virtue or virtuous person. So let's focus now on the Aristotelian notion of virtue as excellence. As we have said, virtue is a good habit. And as human beings, we form habits or certain actions that have been permanent, dispositions that have been permanent to us because of repeated action. Meaning to say, when you keep on repeating something, they become fixed or permanent characteristics or tendencies. So for example, we have mannerisms. Okay. So if you keep on doing certain things, certain gestures, certain body, body movements, they become permanent. They become like our mannerisms. But virtues and vices are different from mannerisms because mannerisms are just based on certain body movements. But virtues and vices as habits are permanent dispositions, not just in terms of body movements, but in terms of behavior, okay, in terms of our uh, character as a person, not necessarily our body. Okay, so virtues are defined, as we have said, as good habits, and many philosophers stress the importance of developing good habits of character. Like, for example, the virtue of benevolence, the virtue of justice, wisdom, charity, honesty, uh, compassion, sympathy, etc. So once a person acquires the habit of justice, for example, he will always habitually act justly. He will always be fair. It will be easy for him to be fair, right? Because that's one of the qualities of a habit. It becomes easy. It becomes almost automatic. Okay? So habits are not acquired instantly. It is developed through repeated and continuous action over time. Okay? So, for example, if you have the good habit of studying, you don't develop the habit of studying over time. You must have developed it long time ago. Perhaps the first time that you study, you struggle. Say you study for 10 minutes as a young boy, as a young girl, or a young child. And then you continue studying so that the 10 minutes became 15 minutes of studying, uh, then 1 hour of studying. So every night you study. So it becomes permanent that you always study. It becomes habitual. Okay. So if before you struggle to focus your attention on what you're studying, now it's automatic. It becomes spontaneous. It becomes second nature to you. Okay. So once we acquire the habit, whether good or bad, it becomes almost permanent. It becomes a second nature to us. Okay. It becomes spontaneous and natural. Now look at the bad habits, the vices. People form the habit, for example, of smoking. And when it becomes habitual, it becomes second nature. Okay, it becomes nature to smoke, and it's now very difficult to break the habit. In the same manner that it's difficult now to break the good habit of studying, or the good habit of being generous. So, according to Aristotle, habits are good virtues. They are the proper or right way of doing something. So, when we do repeated good acts, we develop the virtues. The good act of helping, always help, always help, always help. It becomes permanent. So human virtues are human excellences or dispositions to perform or act in a proper manner, in a proper way. And Aristotle divided the virtues into two types. So there are two kinds of virtues for Aristotle: the moral virtues and the intellectual virtues. So the intellectual virtues are intellectual excellences, because Aristotle uh, defined the virtue as excellence, arete, excellence. Okay, so the intellectual excellences or virtues are excellences of our intellectual or rational faculty. Now, the intellectual virtues may still be divided into two, into the philosophical or philosophic and practical wisdom. Okay, so philosophic and practical wisdom. uh, Philosophic wisdom is purely theoretical, it's purely speculative. And we attain this by studying, by understanding the principles, by understanding reality, the changing structure of reality. So it simply means that we gain an understanding of reality. So, for example, when we regularly read science and philosophy books, or say books about the world, about Earth, about any particular topic, we acquire an understanding of the underlying principles or structures of certain things. Okay? Like, for example, how the distance between the planets or the nature of light, okay? Or the principle of causality, scientific things, etc. Okay? So that is philosophic wisdom. So it's merely to gain knowledge about reality, theoretical knowledge about reality. The second is practical wisdom. So practical wisdom, on the other hand, is the rational understanding about how to conduct our life. Okay, so it's practical because it's a knowledge that you apply to your life. Okay, so it's not knowledge about certain things, it's about knowledge about how to act properly, how to conduct our life. So understanding the rules of conduct or norms of society, the laws of the society, how to behave or act in a particular community, are manifestations of practical wisdom. Okay? So, for example, these are the laws of the land. You study the laws of the land, like, for example, you study the traffic rules, and when you understand the traffic rules, you obey them. So you are able to behave properly. Okay? You are able to follow the laws, behave properly. That is practical wisdom. So intellectual virtues result in the contemplation and understanding of theoretical or speculative truth and the discovery of rational principles which are ought to convey our, no, our everyday actions is practical wisdom. So you have intellectual virtue, okay? So the intellectual virtue is divided into two. You have philosophic and practical wisdom, okay? Now, so that's the intellectual virtues. Now let's go to the second, the moral virtues. Okay? Moral virtues concern the habitual choice of actions in accordance with rational principles also. But the moral virtue is the right disposition to make right decisions and prudent action. So, to enable us to balance our desires and the emotions, we need more than intellectual virtues. The intellectual virtues will just tell us what are the, for example, it will just tell us about our emotions, about our desires. Okay, but it will not help us to balance all our desires and all our emotions. We will need the moral virtues. So it's not enough to understand the theoretical truth or the principles underlying reality. We must be able to make a balance between our desires and our emotions. Okay? So there are people who may be very intelligent, but they use their intelligence for something evil, for evil things. Why? Because they cannot control their desires, their selfish desires. They cannot control their emotions. They cannot control their passions. So they acquired intellectual virtues, but they did not develop the moral virtues. So the intellectual virtue will make us wise, but the moral virtues will make us good. So we need to have both. We need to be wise and we need to be good. Right? So the wise or intelligent individual personifies the intellectual virtues, whereas the continent or moral individuals, the good individual, personifies the moral virtues. So the wise person's excellence is attained through instruction and evidenced by knowledge, by studying, right? Studying the principles, studying the laws, the codes, etc. While the excellence of the continent or the moral person is produced by habits of choice, and it's expressed in practical actions, tempered by both their circumstances and the individual. So when you become a moral person, you know how to act prudently, morally, in a particular situation. Okay? So the two are different. the wise person, and the moral person. So the wise person embodies the intellectual virtue. The moral person or the good person embodies the moral virtues. Okay? Now, Aristotle, however, claims that contemplation, reflection, the activity by which people may attain the highest human happiness, is limited to the divinely gifted few. Very few ever reach that point. Only few people have the intellectual capacity to understand the underlying causes of reality. The practical virtues, on the other hand, meaning the moral virtues, okay, the moral virtues, um, with their lesser degree of happiness, are within reach of ordinary people. So, meaning very few will be very, very wise, okay, because it will really, require certain knowledge of the ultimate principles of things. But practical virtue, the moral virtue, can be attained by even ordinary people. So Aristotle observes that people, for the most part, live at the level of practical decisions and daily behavior. So people can be morally good. Okay, they can be morally good if they form good habits. So the good habits become necessary to moral virtue and can be best formed in a sound social and legal structure. Meaning, what would be a sound social structure? Well, for example, in your family, if there is a good social structure in the family, then the family members can be morally good persons. Okay? So there are more morally good persons than wise persons. Still, fewer are the wise and the morally good person. Okay, so if we can at least develop the moral virtues, then we'll be okay because that means we are good persons. But if we can develop our intellectual virtues, then so much the better because that means we are both wise and good. Okay, now let's go to the next. Virtue as a state of character. We have said that the habits, the good habits, in this case the virtue, becomes second nature to us. It becomes permanent. So it becomes part of our character. So for Aristotle, virtue is a state of character. We become the persons we are because of our virtues. Okay? Now, Aristotle distinguished three elements of our human personality. First, the passions, meaning these are the feelings, the emotions. Then our faculties, okay, our capacities, and the states of character. So as human beings, for Aristotle, we feel, we desire, and we act. Okay? So the passions like anger and fear, and the faculties like the ability to feel anger and fear are not in themselves good or bad. So if meaning anger is not bad in itself. It's because it's part of our nature. We become angry. We become afraid. Okay, it's part of our nature. So it's neither good nor bad. But they can be excessive and can be out of control. So it's normal to be angry, but if your anger becomes out of control, it could be problematic. Okay, so if you cannot control your emotions, if you cannot control your desires, your passions, then it becomes problematic because it might put you in a very compromising situation. Therefore, the passions must be disciplined to follow the rational rules, to follow the rules. They have to be subordinated to the rational faculty, meaning to our intellect and our will. So the virtuous person is one who is able to control his passions and the faculties of emotions so that they don't get out of control. Okay? So it is natural to get angry, okay? But anger must be within the control or the regulation of the intellect, of the mind, and the will. Because if they become out of control in your anger, you might do something that will, that is bad, and you will regret later on. Therefore, virtues or a virtue is not just an excellence. It becomes a state of the character of the person. It becomes your own character. Okay? So virtuous state of character means that a morally good person is not just who performs morally right actions, but one who has developed a habit, a disposition to do what is right. It becomes so it's not just about being just, but you know, having the right disposition to always be just. Okay? To always be just. So here the person has control his emotions, his desires, and his appetites. So even if you put this person into a very difficult situation, like for example, if he has developed the character of being honest, even if you put him to the test, where some people may act dishonestly, but an honest person, because it becomes a permanent disposition to have, for him, it will not be a problem because it is already part of his character to be honest. While other people will struggle to be honest, for him, because it becomes a second nature to him, it becomes permanent, then it will not be a problem to him. He will be honest. He will act rightly. Okay? So, a well-informed character does not only tell the truth, but readily, happily, and easily tell the truth. He, he is he readily, happily and easily becomes honest, right? While other people will struggle, for him, that's not a problem. Okay? So the moral person or the virtuous person delights in virtuous actions and dislikes vicious and immoral actions. So Aristotle provides an analogy. A good musician enjoys beautiful music, but he is pained by bad tunes. Meaning, if you apply that principle to a good person, an honest person will always enjoy honesty. A benevolent person, a charitable person will always enjoy charity, charitable work. But he will always dislike, hate, okay, selfish desires, etc. So the state of character enables the person to fulfill his or her proper function aimed at an intermediate point between extremes. So when you say, so in Aristotle, this virtue is always the mean, because of course sometimes when you are, for example, when you are too cautious, it's not, you have to be cautious, but the extreme of caution is bad. But if you are careless, it's also bad. So for Aristotle, it should be the intermediary between two extreme opposites. And that's our the next point that we are going to discuss. Virtue and the mean. Aristotle says, virtue is a state of character concerned with choice, lying in a mean. What does this mean? Mean would be what is the middle ground. Okay? The middle ground between two extremes. Meaning, not too far left, not this is right. Not too far right, not too far left. It should be in the middle. Not too high, not too low. Okay? What else? Not too hard, not too soft. It should be in the middle. It should be a moderation. But according to Aristotle, it's a me that is relative to us. This being determined by a rational principle, and by that principle by which the man of practical wisdom would determine it. So now he puts in practical wisdom again. So what does he mean by this? He said, the moral virtue is a habitual disposition connected with a choice, like laying a mean that is relative to us. A mean, not too much, not too little. But being too much and being too little is determined by us, depending on our situation. So for example, let's say you're going to eat, okay? You are on a diet. What would be the right diet for you? If you are a wrestler, okay, you are a wrestler, then your diet will be more, meaning you're going to eat more as compared to a person who is not a wrestler, a regular person. Okay? So if you're a regular person, you are not a wrestler, you probably eat 1 cup of rice per meal. So that's the mean for you. If you eat 3 cups of rice, that's too much. If you eat just few uh, spoons of rice, that's too little. So the mean for you is 1 cup of rice. What about the wrestler? 1 cup for him will not be enough. 1 cup of rice will not be enough. So the mean for him would be probably 4 cups of rice. 10 cups will be too much. 2 cups would be too little. But for you, the 2 cups would be too much already. So that's what he means by the mean. It will depend on the person. The person of practical wisdom. And again, what is this practical wisdom? Knowledge of how to do certain things. For example, your wisdom, your practical wisdom will tell you that if you are just a person of, say, uh, the average weight and height, for example, eating 10 cups of rice is too much. The wrestler will have his own practical wisdom by saying, well, since I'm doing too much work, then I have to eat more. Okay? So, apply that to the virtue. Virtue is just like that. So, one of the virtues, for example, courage is a virtue. Okay? Courage is a virtue. So, the opposite of courage would be, well, you're being boastful. No? You are being too courageous. You take risks. Okay? And the opposite of taking too much risk would be, say, overcautious. So the golden mean is courage. But how do you determine the mean of being courageous? See, it will depend on the situation. It will also depend on, if, for example, you're going to walk through a dark alley and you are not familiar in that dark alley. So late at night, you're going to pass through this dark alley and you are not familiar with the dark alley. And you can see from the distance that there are, you know, drunk men in the corner. They're having their good times. They're already very drunk. They're already very rowdy. And of course, since you are not familiar with the place, you don't know them. Will you be courageous? Will you take the risk of, passing through that alley? Now, it becomes a different story if You are from that place. You know this alley. You know this man, this drunk man, and therefore your courage will be much higher than the person who is not familiar with the place, who is not from the place. So you see, that's practical wisdom. And you know exactly how to balance between being courageous, no? The level of courage that you will manifest in that particular situation. Okay? So every ethical virtue is a condition intermediate between the two extremes, two states, extreme states, excess and deficiency. That's the meaning of the doctrine of the mean. Too much and too little are always wrong. The right kind of action always lies in the mean. But the mean, as we've said, is relative to us, depending on the situation, depending on the condition. So, of course, it will not be prudent if you are not from the place to go through that alley alone without any companion. But it will not be imprudent for a person who is from that place who will just go through this because he knows the place. Okay? So a virtuous person is able to avoid these extremes and is always in a situation or condition intermediate between the two. So here, the courageous person judges that some dangers are worth facing and others are not, and experiences fear to a degree that is appropriate to his circumstance or to a particular circumstance. So he lies between the coward who runs away from every danger and experiences excessive fear, and the rash person who judges every danger is worth facing and experiences little fear or no fear at all. So again, if you are not from the place, it will be imprudent to just rush through it. See, take the risk. Okay, it's not being courageous. Okay, so according to Aristotle, the virtues habit of action is always an intermediate state between the opposed vices of excess and deficiency. So, but as I've said, the mean for Aristotle will always vary from one situation to another. So it will require full and detailed acquaintance with the circumstances. So again, if you are from the place, then you know the circumstances, you know the condition. But if you are not from the place, do not. Might as well avoid it. Because that's more prudent than taking risk. Okay? So each of the virtues is a state of being that naturally seeks its mean that is relative to us. So we may know the correct moral virtues, but how do we know what is the right in a particular case? It will depend on us. So Aristotle says it is determined by a rational principle, practical wisdom. And by that principle, by which man of practical wisdom would determine it. So again, it will always be good to combine the moral and intellectual virtues because the practical wisdom is part of the intellectual virtues. So it is at this point that moral virtue is linked up with intellectual virtue of practical wisdom. A person with moral virtue will know which goals are the right ones, the goals that strike a balance among his various desires and emotions. But he will need practical wisdom as to how he can achieve these goals. This involves the intellectual activity of deliberating correctly, of thinking correctly. Okay? So before you do certain action, before you make a decision, you have to deliberate, you have to think, and practical wisdom will help you come up with a decision or will help you decide. So practical wisdom is concerned not only with universal rules, but with particular data which have become familiar from experience. So according to Aristotle, as human beings, we must aim and live a life that is in conformity with our rational nature. Okay? And part of our rational nature would be our intellect and our will. So the satisfaction of our desires and the possession of material goods, through though necessary for our material and physical well-being, are less important than the acquisition of virtue. Of course, we need, you know, we need our physical well-being. But more than our physical well-being would be our moral well. So happiness is attained through the appropriate balance between reasons and desires and the moderation of all things. Moderation of all things, which means not too much, not too little, not too high, not too low. But the mean will always be determined by us, and in the determination of what is the mean for us will depend on our practical wisdom. Therefore, true happiness can be attained only through the cultivation of the virtues, both the moral and intellectual. And that will make a human life complete. That will make the good life. Okay? So I will stop there and pause if you have some questions before we proceed to the next topic. Okay? So some questions, I hope you have some questions here because we are discussing quite a very important topic in, in our life. So please, if you have some questions. Any question, class? Still there?
Yes, sir. Sir, wala po akong question.
Okay. About the others? I hope the discussion is clear. I hope you can learn something from this. Just these are, practical guides.
Yes po.
Okay. From K, you think my connection po concept of virtue and mean sa id? Oh, okay. That's a good question, Kay. Id, superego, and the ego. So the id and the ego and the superego are the basic structures of personality in, according to Freud. And yes, we can see some connection, some relation, or some kind of parallelism, in fact. No? So the id for Freud would be the basic structure of our personality. So it's the basis of our emotions, of our passions, of our desires, okay, of our biological desires. So it's the part of our personality that tells us what we want. No? It operates under the pleasure principle. No? So the id will always desire what is pleasurable. Eat, no. So when we were younger, eat, sleep, and avoid pain, discomfort. So we relieve ourselves, no. Uh, we avoid pain, etc., etc. So it's basically on the desire, on the on the emotions. Of course, the ego is developed once we attain some knowledge about reality. So it operates under the reality principle. So if before we always want to satisfy our id, kain ka ng kain, we always want to eat, 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 drink, 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 sleep, 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 sleep. Now, when you become more mature, when you understand uh, reality, now you will not have to sleep all the time, okay? Or you will not have to eat all the time because you have to meet certain realistic demands. Like for example, well, if you are in front of people, you cannot do certain things, no? Yung baby, pag nakaramdam na jijingle, jijingle lang, di ba? Pero kapag malaki-laki ka na, maghanap ka ng lugar kung saan ka jijingle, no? So that's the ego at work. Then of course, when you grow older, you learn the rules, the norms of society, of religion, family. You develop the superego. So the superego tells you what you must do. What you must do. Okay, so that's the ideal. So if you connect this to Aristotle, virtue is developed when you develop your ego and the superego. Okay? And it's when you try to when that's when reason, the mind, no, uh, attains control of our desires. Okay? So the philosophy or the psychology of Freud provides us with a psychological basis, a basis for the virtues. Meaning, uh, if you really, as a child, hindi mo talaga matuturuan pa. You cannot yet teach the child of certain virtues because he's still a child. What operates for him, or in him, is the id. But later on, he will grow. So therefore, as a child grows, you have to start developing the virtues. Because if you don't start developing the virtues in the child, that's why for Aristotle, upbringing, upbringing is very important. Because without upbringing, you will not develop the virtues. And you will always be at the mercy of the id. The id will be very strong, the superego will be very weak. On the other hand, if the superego is very strong, you become moralistic. You always suppress the id. But that's also an excess. So too much of id is wrong. Too much of the superego is also wrong. So that means, again, you have to find the means. Okay? All right.
Sir, question po.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, if virtues is the proper exercises of man's functions, when is a function properly exercised po?
Why?
If virtues is the proper exercise of man's functions, when is a function properly exercised po?
When?
When is a function properly exercised?
When is the function properly exercised? Kung ang exercise, well, it's exercise. If by exercise we mean we do it every time. There's a need for it. I mean, I don't know if I get your question correctly. Parang kailan natin i-exercise yung function na yun? Yung ba yun? Kailan natin i-exercise yung
Sir,
function?
ano, apo.
Bali po, kung yung virtue po is the proper exercise of man's function, paano
Okay.
po natin malalaman kung yung function na yun is tama?
Okay. Okay. So, paano natin malalaman kung yung function, ganito, una, we always operate in a situation, di ba? So, halimbawa, pag yung proper functioning ng ating mga capacities, ng ating pagkatao ay nasa sa isang situation, no? So, teka, hindi ko masyadong makuha yung ano yun. Pero sige, tuloy ko itong sagot ko na ito, then i-connect ko dun sa naisip ko. So, yung sitwasyon, it will call kung ano yung tama na gagawin mo. So, kanina sinabi ko, every time, kailangan mo talagang gumawa ng tama. Every situation calls for the right functioning. Okay? The right functioning. But of course, ang tanong is, paano malalaman kung right yung functioning mo? Siguro gano'n, no? Paano malalaman kung right yung functioning mo? Merong mga, yung sitwasyon, meron niyang mga standard. I mean, paano ko i-connect yun? Parang ganito, gamitin natin yung example na ginamit ko kanina. Ano yung proper functioning doon? Kung halimbawa, ganun yung sitwasyon. Okay? So, isipin mo, siyempre, ang involved sa sitwasyon ito ay yung safety mo. Okay? So, safety is a consideration in that particular situation. So, paano mo ngayon malalaman kung tama yung functioning mo in relation to your safety? Okay? So, if it will put you at risk or greater risk, hindi tama. Hindi ka nagpa-function na maayos kasi may risk eh. Greater yung risk. Kung halimbawa, hindi ka naman nag-take ng risk, okay? Pero, alam mo, doon sa sitwasyon na yun, pwede ka naman sana mag-take ng risk. Pero hindi ka nag-take ng risk. So, dahil hindi ka nag-take ng risk, hindi ka nakauwi. Hindi ka nakadaan, doon ka lang sa, hindi ka nakauwi. So, dalawa yon. Take ng risk para makauwi ka, kasi dadaan ka doon sa madilim na parte ng kalsada na yon. Or, huwag kang mag-take ng risk, hindi ka makakauwi, pero safe ka naman. So, doon mo pwedeng malaman kung tama yung functioning mo sa ganung mga sitwasyon. But aside from that, syempre, mayroon tayong tinatawag na objective standard. May objective standard. Pagdating doon sa kung tama o mali yung gagawin mo, hindi yung safety ang pinag-uusapan. Kung tama o mali yung gagawin mo, mayroong objective standard kung ano yung mabuti, yung tama, at saka hindi. At kung aligned doon sa kung ano yung tama, yung gagawin mo, pwede mong sabihin, merong proper functioning. No? Hindi ko alam kung nasagot ko yung tanong. Nakuha niyo ba yung sagot ko?
Yes, sir. Opo.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you po.
Okay, sige, salamat. Punta tayo dun sa ibang tanong. Galing kay William. How can Thomistic notions of temperance enlarge and enrich our understanding of that virtue? Ano ba yung virtue na tinutukoy mo, William? Yung temperance? Hello, William. Meron ba? Okay, ayun, may sagot pa rin. May sagot pala sa baba. Paano natin mai-enlarge or mai-enrich yung understanding natin ng virtue ng temperance? First, let's discuss what we mean by temperance. Okay? So yung temperance, yung pag-control ng ating mga bodily desires, no? So temperance yun, halimbawa, yung pag-control mo, so ang gusto, again, gamitin ko yung salita ni yung terminology ni Freud. Sabi ng id, kumain ka ng kumain, di ba? Magpakasarap ka, mag-enjoy ka habang nasa pandemic. Sige, kain ka lang ng kain. Pero ang temperance, sasabihin sa'yo, teka, huwag kang masyadong kumain. So, yung temperance, yun ang nagko-control ng ating bodily desires. Okay? Yung laging nagsisik ng pleasure. Okay? So, paano natin mai-enlarge yung understanding ng virtue? Well, una, intindihin mo kung ano yung mga desires mo. Di ba? So, kung halimbawa, mahilig kang matulog, mahilig kang kumain, yung iba, mahilig sa sexual pleasure, so, alam mo na kung ano yung mga kailangan mong kontrolin. Okay? Alam mo na kung kailangan. At dahil ito virtue, hindi mo pwede sabi, ay, hindi nila ako kakain. Magiging temperate ako. Hindi nila ako kakain. Masama pala yung kain ng kain. So, hindi nila ako kakain. Mali naman na yun. Kasi, that's too little naman. Sobrang kain, vice. Too much. Too little, masama din. So, ano yung temperance? Well, nandun ka dapat sa sakto lang. At again, yung sakto lang na sinasabi ni Aristotle ay depende rin sa atin. So, ano yung sakto sa'yo? Ano yung sakto dun sa kalagayan mo? Okay? Now, for example, titingnan mo yung status mo as a person. So, halimbawa, married ka na person. So, andun yung sexual pleasure. Kasama yun. As part ng married life mo. Pero kung hindi ka naman kasal, wala ka namang asawa, why engage in sexual activity? Okay? Hindi para sa'yo yun. So, you have to be temperate, more temperate in that sense. Okay? So, again, it depends on dun sa iyong status, yung pagkatao mo as a human person. I hope I get that, I answered that, William. No?
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Stephen, if I am right, virtues, attributes that are good, honor, honesty, integrity. Okay, values. Okay, and virtues, actions that are good. Okay. Sagutin ko yung tanong mo dyan. No? First, ano yung value? Kasi yung value at saka yung virtues, siyempre magkaiba yon, no? But they are related. Kasi pag sinabi nating value, meron siyang worth. Halaga. Sa Tagalog, halaga. Worth. Okay? So, it's an assessment of worth. Halimbawa, may value ang pera. May halaga ang pera. Okay? It's an assessment of worth. Paano yung kaibigan? May value din yung kaibigan. May worth siya. Okay? Paano yung fame? Yung pera, yung kayamanan, yung safety? May value yun. So lahat ng yon na may halaga sa iyo, may value. Yun ang ibig sabihin ng value, yung halaga. So, yung sinasabi mo ritong honor, honesty, integrity, value sila kasi meron silang halaga. Mahalaga sila sa iyo. May value yung honor, may value yung honesty, may value yung integrity. Okay? May halaga lahat. Ngayon, yung value, meron siyang hierarchy. Ibig sabihin, meron mga values na sadyang nasa itaas at meron mga values na sadyang nasa ibaba. Okay? Objective yon. Halimbawa, ano ba ang mas mahalaga? Buhay o pera? Siyempre, sabihin natin, buhay mahalaga. No? So, nasa taas yung value ng buhay, yung pera nasa ibaba. Okay? Ano bang mas mataas ang value? Yung kaibigan o pamilya? Ayun, medyo mahirap yun. No? So, depende, kumisan, nagiging subjective yung ranking ng values natin. Pwede mong sabihin, ay, mas importante sa akin yung mga kaibigan ko kaysa sa pamilya ko. So, nagbabago yung hierarchy ng values. Pero may mga values, sobrang talaga nandun sa taas, lalo yung mga spiritual values, at meron namang mga values na sadyang nasa ibaba, yung mga physical values. Okay? So, yung virtues, pag tinignan mo yung virtues, may halaga ba ang virtue? Meron. So, may value yung virtue. Okay? Ngayon, paano natin aayusin yung hierarchy ng values? Well, magdedepende rin yan sa virtues mo. So, kung ikaw yung isang character na tao na merong good moral virtues, magiging maayos yung hierarchy of values mo. Hindi mo ilalagay yung mga bagay na wala na nasa ibaba doon sa itaas. Diba? So, hindi mo ilalagay yung value ng pera over sa value ng tao. Hindi mo ilalagay yung value ng popularidad, yung pagiging sikat, sa iyong integrity. Diba? So, ang mataas palagi sa'yo, yung integridad mo. Kahit na sabihin natin, wala na kaming kakainin, pero hindi ko ibebenta yung aking kaluluwa dyan. So, ano nagde-determine ng valuations mo? Yung halaga mo? Yung character mo as a person. Okay? Other questions? Meron pa ba? I think wala na. So, tuloy tayo. Okay, tuloy tayo sa discussion. Bago ako tumuloy sa ating discussion, meron akong question na itatype dito sa ating chat box. At kung present kayo rito, ibig sabihin, hindi lang kayo naka-login, talagang nakikinig kayo sa sinasabi ko, okay? Sagutin nyo itong tanong na ito. Ano sa Filipino ang value? Okay? So, yan ang aking pang-check ng inyong pakikinig. We continue our discussion and we are going to shift our focus to Chinese philosophy. The first philosopher that we discussed, Aristotle, he belongs to the Western philosophy, to Greek philosophy. So for our discussion, for the next discussion, we are going to focus on two Chinese philosophers, namely Lao Tzu, who represents the Daoist philosophy, and Confucius. Okay, so I hope, well, I'm sure you are familiar with these two philosophers, two Chinese philosophers. So let's discuss now the Taoist way of human conduct. So first, just some preliminary discussion on Daoism. So the main founder or the main hindi naman siya talaga founder, but the main representative of the Taoist principle is Lao Tzu, the philosopher Lao Tzu. And historically, of course, Lao Tzu is uh, ahead of Confucius. So he was few decades ahead of Confucius. Now, the Taoist uh, philosophy based its conception of man on the understanding of the whole of the universe as following a certain universal and unchanging laws. So the term Tao means way, the way or the path. And the main uh, text of Taoism is the Tao Te Ching, the Tao Te Ching, or Tao Te Ching. So it's a very short book actually, composed of sayings attributed to Lao Tzu. Okay, and the philosophy of Lao Tzu, he thinks that the whole of the universe, the whole of cosmos, is one harmonious, unified reality. So there is a law that harmonizes everything. And when we consider the totality of things, the whole of reality, we can see that there is harmony, there is order, there is uh, unity, there is beauty in the cosmos. But so Lao Tzu viewed reality holistically. And it is when we try to fragmentalize, when we try to focus only on the fragments or the parts, that reality or the cosmos becomes chaotic. So the key to living the good life or the key to harmony is to follow these laws of nature. That represents the way, okay, the way, the Tao, okay, the Tao. So these are the universal, unchanging laws of reality. And man must comprehend these unchanging laws, and he must act according to these laws. Otherwise, there will be discord, there will be disharmony, there will be disorder, there will be suffering, etc., etc. Okay? So, understanding the laws of the Tao or the way is important to being a sage or a virtuous man. And the understanding and practice of this invariable law is called in Taoism as practicing enlightenment. So if you try to understand the notion of practicing enlightenment, it's very similar to practical wisdom. Very similar to practical wisdom of Aristotle. Because enlightenment would tell us that we should understand the laws, the underlying laws of nature. Same as what Aristotle tells us, that we have to understand the underlying structure or principles of reality. And that we have to act according to this. We have to have practical wisdom according to Aristotle. And for Lao Tzu, it means practicing enlightenment. Okay? So the sage, going back to Lao Tzu, the sage or the enlightened man associates the Tao with spontaneity and creativity. He frees himself from selfishness and desire and appreciates simplicity. So again, in this point, we can see similarities between Aristotle and Lao Tzu. Okay? That we have to free ourselves from desires, from the passion. Of course, for Aristotle, we have to control the passions. For Lao Tzu, we have to free ourselves from the clutches. So it's the same. No? If we control our desires, then we become, we free ourselves from the clutches instead of our desires and instead of our passions controlling us, we are the ones controlling them. So in effect, we free ourselves from their, from their clutches. And the most important thing here in Taoism is we have to act with spontaneity and creativity. We have to follow nature. Because following nature means following the way of nature, the Tao of nature. Okay? Spontaneity, acting naturally, acting simply. Because if we don't act naturally, if we act artificially, if we are not simple in our ways, we tend to conquer, we tend to manipulate, we tend to control nature. Okay? So let's go to the Tao and the invariable laws. What are these invariable laws? As we've said, the Tao means the way or path. And we've said that Tao Te Ching is the main book of Taoism. And that we view the universe, the cosmos, holistically, then it expresses harmony and purpose, etc. So when we try to change the flow of things, then that's when discords, that's when chaos, disorder comes in. So we have to follow nature. Imagine, for example, how the river flows. The river is not just a stream of water flowing through it. Part of the river is, of course, the river bank. And the stream follows the contour of the bank. So it's one way of following nature. We follow the contour. We follow the path. But when we try to change the flow of the river by changing, for example, the contour of the banks or putting some barriers like dams, right? Then we force the flow of the stream to change direction, and the water will try to change it itself according to its natural flow. So if we try to go against nature, nature has its own way of, exercising or manifesting its will. So we have to have a holistic view of the whole thing. We cannot just view the flow of the water, or we cannot just focus on the banks. We have to focus on everything. And when you look at the river as a whole, you can see you know, the harmony, okay, the beauty, the purpose, the power of nature. So we have to understand how nature works and follow the way of nature instead of going against it. Okay? Now, for Lao Tzu, to be enlightened is to know the invariable laws of nature. And what are these laws? One of the most fundamental laws states that when a thing reaches its extreme, it reverts back. When you go to the total opposite, the natural tendency is to go to the other opposite. When you are too high, the natural tendency is to go to the opposite, the lowest. When you go farthest right, the natural thing to happen is it will go to the farthest left. So these are things, these are laws that do not change. Lao Tzu said, well, there are things change, but the laws that govern things, they are permanent. That's why he calls it the invariable laws, because invariable meaning unchanging laws of nature. And one of them is this, the law of reversal. Meaning, you go to the extreme, then natural tendency is it will revert back to the opposite. So anything that develops certain extreme qualities, those qualities invariably revert to become their opposites. Okay? So, for example, too much wealth will revert to poverty. Too much power or strength will revert to weakness. Conversely, too much ignorance will revert to knowledge. So that's the natural flow of things. And to resist this process or rule would be to go against the laws of nature. Okay? So the opposites are not only mutually causal, they are merely relative value in comparison with one another. So here, again, remember the mean of Aristotle. See, the extreme, the extreme. So they have similar ideas. We have to go to the center. Again, in the millennial language, it's sakto lang. Kung ano lang yung tama. Pag sobra, sobrang taas, sobrang baba. Sobrang kanan, sobrang kaliwa, nasa gitna lang. Okay? And again, these opposites are actually causally relative. They are relative in comparison with one another. So for example, how high is high? How far is right? Okay? How high is high? It will depend on what's considered to be low. Right? How beautiful is beautiful? Well, it depends on what you consider to be ugly. Okay? So how good is good? Well, it depends on what you consider to be evil. So difficult and easy are relative. How difficult is difficult? Well, it depends on what you consider to be easy. How strong is strong? It will depend on what you consider to be weak. How bright is bright? It will depend on what you consider to be dark. They are relative opposites. So, for Lao Tzu, the good and bad both exist in an everlasting exchange. Okay? So, we cannot just say, this is good. It depends on what you consider to be bad. Relative. Okay? So, for example, rain. Well, is rain good? Well, it depends. In times of drought, rain is good. We actually pray for rain during drought, during the summer. But during rainy season, we pray no rain. We hope that it does not rain. So, time of flood, the rain would be bad. So, they are mutually relative. Okay? Now, according to Lao Tzu, these theories may seem paradoxical, but they're not paradoxical if we try to understand them, because these are the laws of nature. To ordinary people who have no idea of this law, for them it may seem paradoxical. But the man who comprehends the invariable and relies upon it for his action does not follow his own partial opinion, and therefore without prejudice. So he just follows the laws of nature. So the man who comprehends and relies on the invariables, the laws of nature, may likewise become all-pervading and unfailing, and thus he will not fail throughout his lifetime, because he follows the laws of nature. Again, this is called practicing enlightenment. The enlightened man associates the Tao with simplicity, with creativity, with spontaneity. So he frees himself from selfish personal desires. Okay? Now, let's go to one very important concept in Daoism, and that is the wu-wei. Okay? So, from the general theory that reversing is the movement of the Tao, a well-known Taoist theory is deduced. And this is the theory of the wu-wei. According to this theory, everything comes from the ultimate wu. Wu is translated as nothing, which is the unnamed or the invisible. So these are different translations, okay, of the wu. Nothing, unnamed, invisible. So wu wei is translated literally as having no activity. Wei is activity. So when you put them together, wu wei, no activity or non-action. Okay, so literally when you say wu-wei means acting without acting. Again, if you listen to that, wu-wei meaning acting without acting. Because in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu said, the sage or the virtuous person or the king who follows the way accomplish something by doing nothing. How can you accomplish something by doing nothing? Not doing anything. But although it is translated as having no activity, it does not really mean doing completely doing nothing. Okay? It means lesser activity or doing less or acting without arbitrariness or artificiality. It simply means doing it the natural way. Okay? So when we do the natural way, we achieve a state of equilibrium or we align ourselves to the laws of nature. Okay? So it's like just let things be, just follow nature, do not interrupt, do not disrupt. Okay, because if you do too much, okay, you tend to become arbitrary, you tend to become artificial. But if we just let things be, if we just let nature follow its natural course, then we can see what Lao Tzu would say, the soft and invisible power within all things. The soft and invisible power of nature. So, wei wu wei simply means do not overdo things. Okay? So, activities are like many other things. If one has too much of them, they become harmful rather than good. So, the purpose of doing something is to accomplish something. But if we overdo things, if we perform excessive activity, then the result is worse than not having done it at all. A well-known Chinese story describes how two men they were asked to draw snakes. Okay, so the one who will finish first, of course, will win a prize. Okay, so they started drawing, and the first man, he was rather fast, you know, so he finished first. When you look at the other guy, the other man was still, you know, struggling with his drawing of the snake. So while waiting for the other guy to finish, the first man started adding something to the snake. He added feet, then he added wings, and then finally time is up. So they have to submit what they have drawn. The first guy who finished first, when he submitted his the drawing of the snake, the teacher said, "Well, you lost." Why? Because although he finished first, he overdid his drawing. Because there's no snake that has a fit. So that's the example of overdoing that defeats the very purpose of the activity. So over-eagerness could lead not to accomplishing anything at all. So to follow the Wu Wei is to act naturally and spontaneously. Okay? The opposite of this are artificiality and arbitrariness. So we have to restrict our activity to what is necessary and what is natural. And necessary means what is necessary to the achievement of a certain purpose and not overdoing things. So because when you overdo things, you go to the extreme. Okay? And it's similar to what Aristotle said. You go to the extreme, that's a vice. You don't accomplish anything. So natural means following one's te, means one's power with no arbitrary effort. In doing this one one must take simplicity as the guiding principle of life. So in ancient texts, wu wei is associated with water through its yielding nature. So water may not appear or may appear to be so soft and weak, but it can actually move earth and carve stones. Like the example of the stream of the river. It can carve the river banks. So the universe, when you look at it, works harmoniously according to its own ways. And when we exert our will against nature, we disrupt that harmony. So the way of the Tao is the natural way. We have to follow nature so that everything goes well with it and in it. So in Taoism, virtue is genuineness, or meaning being true to one's own nature, meaning avoiding artificiality and pretense, avoiding arbitrariness. And we lose our original virtue or day if we have so many desires or so many knowledge. And when we try to satisfy our desires, the result is the opposite. Okay? So, in his desire to accomplish, in our desire to accomplish many objectives, sometimes we resort to artificiality. We break the laws. We take shortcuts. Okay? Uh, we cheat. Okay? We, do corrupt activities. We move away from the way of the Tao. But the teaching of Lao Tzu is very simple. Do it the natural way. Do not cheat. Do not cut corners. Do not break the law. Follow the law. Okay? So, problem is that people have very little knowledge about nature, about the world. And they have so many desires. And they let their desires control them. And that's the cause of this all. So the wise man is very cautious of the work of the day in everything, giving them the power to develop according to their own nature. The sage or the wise man does not interfere, he just let things be. He does everything naturally, creatively, spontaneously. He follows the wu-wei. To follow the wu-wei is not to be passive, but to conform to the law of nature. So last point here, what is the sage? The sage, in the paradoxical qualities of the Tao, meaning being through non-being, or action through non-action, strength through softness are all present. So the sage understands that to yield is to be preserved whole. To yield is to be preserved whole. Let's connect that to courage, for example. You know what risk you will, what will be the risk that you will take. And if you understand the risk, then you will not overdo things. Okay? You will not take more risks, more than necessary. And therefore, you preserve yourself. Okay? You overdo things, you take the risk, too much risk. You may not be able to accomplish anything. It's not to say that you don't have to take risk. You have to take the necessary risk, but do not overdo it. Okay? So, to bend is to become straight. I have a very good example here. Look at the bamboo. The bamboo, right? The bamboo just sway. No, it does not. Uh, it does not go against the wind. It does not actually resist the wind. It resists the wind by, you know, by following, going through it, by being patient, by being pliant, by being resourceful. Okay, so that's how the bamboo resists the wind. So you may think it is soft, but it's not. It actually has its own inner strength. To be empty is to be full. Because if you consider yourself already full, you will not be able to add something. So the thing is always to consider yourself half empty. Okay? To be worn out is to be renewed. To have little is to possess. Because if you consider yourself as already possessing everything, what is there to gain? To be plenty is to be perplexed. See? Therefore, the sage embraces the one and becomes the model of the two. He does not show himself, yet he is luminous. Meaning he does not boast of anything. He does not exhibit everything. He does not tell everybody that I am this, I am that. Okay? He does not justify himself, and yet he becomes prominent. So you don't have to, you don't have to exhibit everything that you have. See? The sage does not boast himself, yet he gains merit. He does not brag, yet he can endure long. It is precisely because he does not compete that the world cannot compete with him. The sage understands that strength is gained through softness. Very, very good lessons you can learn from Daoism. Okay, so this is the way in which a sage or a prudent man can live safely in the society and the world in general and achieve his aims. This is Lao Tzu's answer and solution to the original problem of the Taoists, which was how to preserve life and avoid harm and danger in the human world. This is also the lesson we can learn as to how to conduct and live in the modern world. The man who lives prudently must be meek, humble, and easily content. To be meek in the way to preserve one's strength and to be strong. It's the way, no? To preserve one's strength and to be strong. Humility is the direct opposite of arrogance. So that if arrogance is a sign that a man's advancement has reached its extreme limit, meaning you are arrogant that I have accomplished everything, no? Humility is a contrary sign that limit is far from reach. And to be content safeguards one from going too far and therefore from reaching the extreme. You see, so many lessons here. Now, the most important point to realize is that in order to live in any specified manner, one must begin by living in a manner exactly the opposite. So if you want to be strong, you need to accept your weakness. If you want to be knowledgeable, accept your own ignorance. Okay? So if you want to achieve things, then start with the opposite. So the man who knows the invariables knows that the movement of the Tao is reversal. Therefore, he avoids going to the extremes. And from Lao Tzu, we learn, therefore, that human conduct must be characterized by spontaneity, humility, simplicity, non-interference, and contentment. Spontaneity best captures in a positive value what Lao Tzu meant by non-action. Non-action does not mean never acting at all. It means opposing only forceful action. That is why he said that a sage must, or sage behavior should take nature as its model. Thus, to be a sage, one must negate the attitude that one is an agent who must act to impose his will on everything and everyone around him. Humility is the best attitude of a sage. It keeps man from reaching the extreme. By being humble, one never reaches the limit. And when things are done, and one doing them humbly relinquishes all claims to merit, well, he is far from the limit, and he has mastered the natural way. Non-interference is also the attitude of the sage. Water symbolizes the behavior of the sage because it does not compete, but rather takes the path of least resistance. So you know why water, the flow of the river, for example, can carve through stones, or water can flow into many different directions because it takes the path of least resistance. Since interfering in the affairs of others, or the operation of nature is the worst product of willful activity, Lao Tzu advises us that we must back away from all middlesome behavior. Such behavior is not only harmful, but it's pointless. So there you are, the Taoist virtue, the Taoist states. And really, we can learn a lot from the Taoist principles or the Taoist theory. Okay, now let's go to the Confucian virtues. Okay, so this is the last point in our discussion for today. Again, as I've said, Lao Tzu is ahead of Confucius, and although they belong to different philosophies, well, they share very a lot in common. So they're talking about how to develop our virtues, how to cultivate the virtues. And for Lao Tzu, cultivating the virtue means following the way of nature, the Tao. Okay, and acting with simplicity, okay, with humility, with spontaneity, etc., etc. Now, Confucius, for his part, developed the proper conduct of man in society, how to act specifically in the society. So central to Confucian teaching is the cultivation of human virtues. Okay, human virtues, and again, the idea of Confucius is very much similar, also very much similar to the idea of Aristotle. So every normal human being, according to Confucius, cherishes the aspiration to become the superior man. The superior man meaning the gentleman, the sage. So the superior man, the sage, the virtuous man. What else? Uh, the Junchu, Chinchu. That's the sage. They're all the same. Okay. So the sage is more than just a literati. It's more than just a learned man. So again, if you compare this to Aristotle, the sage is more than, it's not just a wise person, okay? But he is a well-rounded person. It's not, it's not just literate, meaning he's not a person who just developed the intellectual virtues. He's developed also the moral virtues. So it's similar to what Aristotle said, that we have to develop the intellectual and the moral virtues. We have to be both wise and good. And that is exactly the sage for Confucius. Okay? Not just a learned man, but somebody who can contribute positively to the state or to the society. So Confucius wanted his disciples to be more than just literati or the Jew, wanted them to be well-rounded men, men who are not only literate but also useful in the state and to the society. He was concerned about the total development of his disciples and the peoples. So Confucius concerned himself with the people's individual development, which he maintained takes place within the context of human relationships. So we develop our virtues in the context of our relationship with others. So virtues like, for example, piety, okay, benevolence, uh, sincerity are the ways in which one should act towards others, but from an underlying attitude of humanism, meaning we always have to treat others the way we want to treat ourselves. Well, that's actually the golden rule of Confucius. So what are the fundamental virtues according to Confucius? There are many virtues that he developed, but these are the main important virtues which serve as the foundation for the life of a perfect goodness. So you have the Ren, translated as benevolence or humanness towards others. Then the Yi, Yi is righteousness. Li, propriety. Shin, sincerity. Xiao, meaning filial piety, respect for parents. Chi, wisdom. And Yue, harmony. We're going to discuss first five. Okay? So first, you have the Ren, benevolence. So the doctrine of Ren stands out from the collection of thought that Confucius developed as the central thesis of his whole system. So be it in ethics, in politics, the life ideal flows from Ren, which for Confucius is the perfect virtue. So it's the cardinal principle of humanism. It expresses the ideal of cultivating human relations, developing our human faculties, in cultivating our personality, and upholding human rights. So it also stresses the correct procedure for human relations, the proper way for men to meet each other and leading to positive efforts for the good of others. So he calls Lao Tzu, Confucius calls the man of Ren as the Junju, or the perfect gentleman, the sage. So Ren is interpreted as benevolence. It shows itself in a kindly regard for the welfare of others. So the Ren person is one who, wishing himself to be settled in position, sets up others, wishing himself to have access to the powerful in order to give access to others. Meaning, the man of Ren thinks not only of himself, he thinks of the good of others. Okay? And the virtue of benevolence is actually uh, enunciated or expressed through the golden rule. Okay, so what do you want done to yourself? What do you want? What you want to do to yourself, you do it to others, and don't do to others what you don't want others to do to you. Okay? That's the golden rule, and this is expressed in the positive and negative way. So the Zhong and the Shu. So positively, it is expressed: do to others what you wish others do to you. That's the Zhong. And in the negative way, do not do to others what you wish others not to do to you. The Shu. So this principle and practice of the Zhong and the Shu become the standard of measurement to regulate one's conduct. This is called the principle of applying a measuring square. Principle of applying a measuring square. Meaning, what is the measure of respect that you expect others to do to you, or to, to extend to you? The amount of respect that you uh, give to others will be the same amount of respect that others will give to you. That's the measuring square. So, if you want others to respect you, you have to respect them as well. If you don't want to be embarrassed, don't embarrass them. If you want others to be just to you, be just to them. Because the amount of justice that you express or you give to others will be the same amount of justice that will give it unto you. That's applying the measuring square. Okay? So you want to be respected, respect as well. Respect other people. Okay? You want the amount of love you show to other people will be the same amount of love that will be shown unto you. That's applying the measuring square. Okay? So uh, let's move on to the next. Righteousness. Li, or Yi rather, Yi. Yi means oughtness of a situation. This means that everyone in society will have certain things which he needs to do. But you have to do without ulterior motive. So righteousness is doing something for the right intention. The righteous act is done without any ulterior motive. Okay? Do it because that is the right thing to do. Okay? But if you're going to do something because you need, you expect others in return, because there are, so I'm going to help this person because I will expect him that in return he will also do the same favor for me. No. Okay? So we do the right thing for the right intention without any selfish motive or intention. That is why the ren must be coupled with yi. Because we say, do to others what you would want others to do to you. Yes, that's the rule. But I'm not doing this because I am expecting something in return. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. It's the yi. Okay? So without any ulterior motive. Of course, if you do this, people will also do this to you. It works the same way because the other person, when he does that, so if I help him, he will also help me back because on his side, he's also helping, and therefore there will also be a corresponding help. But he does not help me because he's expecting to me to help back. No, that's not how it works. So we have to combine ren with yi, with the right intention. Now, the next is li, doing it properly, propriety. You see, you may have the ren and you may have the good intention, but you have to do it the proper way. So li is propriety, doing things the right way. Well, the original meaning of li is traced back to the rituals. In Chinese tradition, there are always the rituals, the proper way of doing things, the rituals. Okay, so it's a general rule of propriety. But Confucius transformed it into saying, well, it's not just about following the ceremony, following the conventional, no, the conventional customs. It also means that doing something the right way. Like for example, if you have to help other people, if you have to be generous to other people, show your generosity to other people. Like for example, you donate. Like during this pandemic, people are donating, people are helping. Well, we hope that when they help, they are doing it with the right intention, with ye. But it's not enough that we have the right intention. We have to do it properly, the right way. And how? Well, is it doing it properly if you help other people and then you post it on social media, make an advertisement out of it? I don't think that is the right way. All right? Or you tell everybody that, well, I made this donation. That is not helping the right way. That is not li. So, meaning we have to combine the ren, the yi, and the li. Okay? So, we want to help other people. We do it with the right intention, and we do it the proper way. Okay? Now, let's go to the next sincerity, shin. So sincerity, Shin, means honesty, trustworthiness. It means that more than a mere harmonious social relation, it means that we become truthful, we are honest in our speech, we are sincere in our words, we keep our promise, okay? We do our duties, okay? That's sincerity. So the sincere man in Confucius' eyes is the man whose conduct was always based on the love of virtue, and who in consequence sought to observe the rules of right conduct in his heart because he loves the virtue. Meaning, yes, you have the right intention, okay? You do it the right way, but you have to do it with all sincerity, without any pretense, okay? With all the humility. Now, of course, some people nowadays, they do good things that's just to show off, right? Just to show off. It's not being sincere. People help, people are generous, but they're not really generous because it's just, a show. It's just a pretense. I remember the words of Buber, it's like seeming, all pretension. Okay? And the last, of course, is filial piety or Shao. And this filial piety is actually rooted in the family. It is the virtue that prompts us to love and respect our parents, no? To love and respect our elders, to bring honor and comfort, happiness to our family. That's filial piety. And for Confucius, it is the root of all virtue. Okay? Filial piety. But of course, during the ancient times, this devotion was somehow carried to, a wrong direction. Uh, uh, Parents, okay, they don't want, because of the patriarchal system, uh, the children cannot, separate from the parents. They are always within, in the family. So they cannot disobey their parents. They cannot decide on their own, etc., etc. So, uh, but what is important here is that we show respect to the elderly, to our parents. We show respect to our family, because again, as we've said, this development of the virtue in Confucius is rooted in the society, in the community, and the basic unit of the community or the society is the family itself. All right, now, so who is the picture of all this? Who is the model of all this? According to Lao Tzu, it should be the Yunchu or the gentleman. Okay, so all people will have to strive to be the perfect man, to be the virtuous man, the ideal gentleman. Okay, so he combines the qualities of a saint, of a scholar, and a gentleman, meaning Junsu. Now, in the Chinese tradition before, when you say Junsu, it is only attainable by those in the noble class, in the nobility, in the aristocrat. So you become a gentleman. So in the ancient tradition, a gentleman is somebody who belongs. A Junju is somebody who belongs to the aristocrat or to the nobles. But according to Confucius, doesn't work that way. Anybody can be a Junju if he develops the virtues, all the virtues. Okay, and of course for his followers, Confucius is a perfect example of the Junju. Okay? Now, the opposite of the Junju is the Shaoren. Shaoren literally means small person. Okay, so it is the person who is self-conscious, meaning selfish, is a person who is greedy, superficial. He's the total opposite of the Junju. Okay? The Shaoren is the complete opposite of the Junju. So the Junju is the saints. And we all strive to be the Junju. So in this discussion, we have focused on the virtuous person. So the virtuous person for Aristotle is both wise and moral. For Lao Tzu, the sage is the one who follows nature, okay, who acts with simplicity, with humility, with spontaneity. And for Confucius, is the one who combines the qualities of a learned man, okay, of a wise man, of a moral man, and a saint. So we hope that, everybody can be a Junju. Everybody can be a sage. Everybody can be wise, good. So in our discussion, we focus on what the human person is. And in this last discussion of ours, we focus on what would be a virtuous human person. So it's not just about being a human person. It's about being a good human person, being a sage. So I end my discussion there. And if you have some questions, then feel free to ask questions.